The day began with a piercing shriek that tore through the morning calm at the Willow Creek Animal Shelter. Two volunteers immediately dropped their tasks and sprinted toward the sound. One of them managed to catch a fleeting image, a formidable blur of black and tan, its teeth exposed and foam flecking from its jaws. A kennel door, ripped from the inside, dangled crookedly from its hinges. At the heart of the turmoil was Shadow. His eyes were wide and frantic, scanning his surroundings while his ears were flattened against his head. Every muscle in his form was taut, poised to strike. From behind their enclosures, the other animals whimpered, sensing the palpable fear permeating the air. Claire, who had transitioned from a nursing career to volunteering at the shelter, had never witnessed such a scene. Staff members scrambled to get the tranquilizer gun, yelling, "Be careful! Stay away! He's volatile." The dart found its mark on Shadow's flank. He lurched, then collapsed to the ground, his chest heaving. Yet, what captured Claire's attention was not the display of aggression. It was the agony and sheer terror evident in his eyes. As the others began to discuss the possibility of euthanasia, Claire remained motionless, her heart pounding. She perceived something in Shadow that seemed invisible to everyone else. They recounted Shadow's story to Claire later. He had been discovered roaming near the scorched ruins of an old farmhouse, his fur streaked with soot and a partially melted chain still hanging from his neck. Animal Control reported that he snarled at anyone who approached. He had bitten a handler on the first day and broken a gate on the second. No one dared get close without protective gloves, shields, or sedatives. But Claire perceived something different. In the soft glow of the infirmary, as Shadow lay unconscious, Claire knelt by his side. She tenderly cleaned his burns with warm saline, her hands remaining firm despite the growls that escaped him even in his sleep. He bore deep gashes on his legs, raw skin under his collar, and an unmistakable, haunting tension throughout his body. She worked in silence, moving slowly, offering no words and asking for nothing in return. Over the following days, her routine remained the same. She tended to him only when he was sedated, always cautious not to overstep his boundaries. She dressed his wounds, changed his bandages, and replenished his water. Afterward, she would sit nearby, just beyond his cage, reading in a low voice or humming softly to herself. Other staff members suggested she was wasting her time, calling the dog broken, dangerous, and not worth the effort. Claire, however, was not persuaded. She had encountered similar trauma in war veterans, emergency room patients, and lost individuals who required more than just medication or a diagnosis. This dog was not malicious. He was wounded, and more than anything, she felt certain he was terrified. It was the beginning of spring break when Emma first visited the shelter. Claire hadn't intended to bring her. With shifts lined up for the week and no one available to look after her daughter, she had little choice. She filled Emma's backpack with snacks and coloring books, instructing her softly, "Just stay near me, okay?" But Emma was not the type of child to sit still and wait. By the time Claire was organizing the storage closet, Emma had already meandered toward the rear kennels. That is where she spotted him. Shadow, still on edge, still healing, and still eyeing the world as if it had wronged him. Emma, however, did not recoil. Before uttering a word, she stood several feet away for a considerable time, simply observing. She cocked her head, taking in every twitch of his ears, every flicker of his eyes. Her mother had always taught her that dogs communicate with their entire bodies, not just with their barks. And Shadow's silent posture spoke volumes. Emma did not approach him directly at first. She did something most adults would not have considered. She sat down at a non-threatening distance, pulled a slice of turkey from her lunchbox, and laid it gently on the floor, just beyond his reach. Then, she turned her body to the side, avoiding direct eye contact, and waited. Only after Shadow's growl subsided to a quiet huff did she inch forward. She remained silent, respectful. Finally, she whispered, "Hi, you look tired." Shadow didn't snarl. He didn't bark. He simply stared, as if attempting to decipher her meaning. She sat cross-legged and took a crumpled drawing from her pocket. It depicted a dog with large ears and a pink heart floating above its head. "I made this," she explained, sliding it carefully under the gate. "It's for you." Claire arrived just moments later, her breath catching in her throat when she saw her daughter so close. But Shadow had not moved. His ears were alert, But his body was still, his gaze fixed on Emma, not with fear, but with an emerging curiosity. In the days that followed, it became evident that Emma saw past Shadow's anger just as Claire had seen past his pain. She wasn't fearful, she was captivated. From the very beginning, she treated him like a trusted friend, intuitively knowing when to offer a quiet presence and when to provide space. She allowed trust to form organically between them, instinctively understanding what the adults could not grasp. What Shadow required was not control or training. He needed trust. And somehow, Emma offered it unconditionally and without a moment's hesitation. The major shift did not manifest with barks or wagging tails. It arrived in quiet moments. Shadow no longer lunged when Emma passed by his enclosure. He ceased growling when she spoke. He would simply watch. Every day, Emma came back. Sometimes she brought a book, other times a blanket, but she was always calm and never demanding. She would sit near his cage and recount her day, telling him stories about school, about the pets she hoped to have one day, and about the time she tried to teach a squirrel to perform tricks. And Shadow, from his corner, would just listen. Then, everything was upended the day the fire alarm sounded. An electrical fault had ignited a small blaze in the rear storage room. Smoke began to flood the hallway, and staff rushed to evacuate the animals. But when Claire and Emma got to Shadow's kennel, he was still locked inside. Most volunteers were reluctant to approach. He could bite. "We don't have time," one person yelled. Shadow stood frozen in his cage, trembling. The smoke and the chaos had awakened something deep within him, a memory, a nightmare. Once again, he was being left behind. But then Emma's voice cut through the commotion. "Please," she cried, tears welling in her eyes as she tugged on Claire's sleeve. "Don't leave him. Please, someone save him. He's scared. He's not bad." She repeated her plea over and over, her small voice piercing the noise and the fear. A staff member finally came forward, unlocked the kennel, tossed a leash inside, and called softly to Shadow. He wavered, but then moved forward slowly, ears back and body low to the ground. When he came out into the hallway, coughing and panting, his eyes swept over the crowd and settled on Emma. He didn't flee or bark. He just stood there, dazed, his chest heaving from the smoke. The world around him was a blur, but through the haze, he saw her. Emma was kneeling just outside the smoky corridor, her hands pressed tightly over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The instant their eyes met, Emma lunged forward, stopped only by Claire's gentle grip on her shoulders. "He's okay," Claire whispered, her own voice unsteady. Emma nodded furiously, her tears falling even faster. "I knew he'd come out. I just knew he would." Shadow took one small step in their direction, then another. This time, however, it wasn't driven by fear. It was something gentler, something new. And then he did something completely unexpected. He lay down, right in the center of the hallway, and released a long, shuddering breath, his eyes still fixed on Emma. From that day forward, Shadow began to transform. He no longer paced his kennel at night. His snapping became less frequent. He started to sit nearer to the bars of his enclosure, closer to Emma, waiting for her and leaning in her direction. Because in the moment he had dreaded most, someone had called for him. And this time, he was not left behind. The connection that grew between them was not abrupt. It was constant and steady. Shadow did not instantly become a typical pet. He still recoiled at loud noises and would retreat to the back of his kennel when unfamiliar people filled the hall. But whenever Emma entered, his entire demeanor softened. One morning, she arrived carrying an object wrapped in a towel. It was her most treasured plush toy, a small, well-loved stuffed dog with one ear sewn back on. Claire arched an eyebrow. "Sweetheart, are you certain you want to give him that?" she asked softly. "He might tear it to shreds." Emma just smiled. "That's all right. It's his now." She knelt by the kennel and gently pushed the toy through the bars. Shadow tensed, his eyes locked on the offering. He sniffed it once, then again, and for a moment, everyone held their breath. But he did not destroy it. Instead, he nudged it gently with his nose, then carefully picked it up and carried it to the far corner, curling his body around it, as if protecting something precious. His eyes no longer held rage. They appeared weary, vulnerable, and full of trust. From then on, the plush toy remained with him through every feeding and every checkup. Soon, Emma began to spend more time inside the kennel under close watch. She would brush his coat with slow, deliberate movements. Shadow would lean into her touch, his eyes closing as if he were rediscovering a long-lost comfort. Claire attempted it once, reaching in to scratch him behind the ear. Shadow let out a low growl, not aggressive, but uncertain. She withdrew her hand. It was evident that Shadow had made his decision. He did not want everyone. He did not need everyone. He had chosen Emma, and Emma never demanded that he be anything other than what he was, a wounded dog who simply needed someone to believe in him. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the phone call arrived. Claire had just finished cleaning Shadow's kennel when the shelter manager motioned for her. "You should listen to this," she said, handing her the phone. On the other end of the line was an elderly man named Mr. Bennett. His voice was raspy, heavy with age and sorrow. He recounted how, nearly a year prior, his home had been burglarized. His dog, a retired police canine named Max, had been stolen. He had spent months searching, filing reports, and posting flyers, but nothing came of it until a friend sent him a photo from the shelter's website. "I'd recognize that face anywhere," Mr. Bennett said. "That's my boy." Claire's heart sank. Shadow. Max had not been abandoned. He had been taken. The fire, it all started to make sense now. The panic, the trauma, the way he froze at the smell of smoke. The shelter scheduled a visit for Mr. Bennett the following day. When he arrived, he moved slowly, relying heavily on a cane. In his other hand, he held a faded photograph of a younger Shadow sitting with him on a porch, both of them looking happy. Shadow stood at the rear of his kennel as the man came in. He was initially motionless, his eyes narrowed and ears slightly raised in caution. Mr. Bennett knelt with some difficulty, placed the photo near the bars, and whispered, "You saved my life once. Do you remember that night in the snow when I fell outside? You barked until the neighbors came. You always knew what was important." A long, silent pause followed the old man's words. Shadow tilted his head, his ears twitching at the sound of the familiar yet distant voice. He blinked slowly, appearing uncertain. Mr. Bennett then reached into his coat and produced something else, a small, worn leather collar with a tarnished brass nameplate. "You used to wear this," he murmured, holding it out. "You never liked tags. Always tried to chew them off." Shadow's gaze shifted to the collar. He remained still at first, then let out a low, hesitant whimper. It was barely a sound, but it made Claire draw a sharp breath. Mr. Bennett offered a gentle smile. "You were the bravest partner I ever had. I didn't give up looking, you know. I never stopped." For a fleeting second, Shadow's body leaned forward, only to tense up again. Torn, Shadow hesitated, then took a cautious step forward. He lowered his head and sniffed the familiar scent on the man's coat, his eyes showing a mix of confusion and recognition as he studied the man's face, trying to align the past with the present. Then he backed away, not out of fear, but with indecision, like a soldier uncertain if the battle is truly over. Mr. Bennett did not push. He simply nodded and said softly, "You don't have to come back, boy. Not if you found where you belong." And from across the room, Emma watched, clutching the plush toy tighter than ever. It was on a gray Saturday afternoon that everything shifted. Claire had thought Emma was out for the day with a school friend, but by noon, she hadn't returned home. Phone calls went to voicemail. The library, where she claimed she would be, reported they hadn't seen her. Panic quickly set in. Claire contacted the police, friends, and anyone she could think of. Her voice trembled as she provided the description: 8 years old, curly hair, a bright red hoodie. At the shelter, Shadow had sensed something was amiss long before anyone else. That morning, when Emma hadn't shown up at her usual time, he had been pacing incessantly. He wouldn't eat or sit still. His ears perked up at every sound of footsteps outside, and when the front door opened, he would rush forward, only to find it wasn't her. Claire was too distraught to notice him when she arrived hours later, clutching her phone with trembling hands. She could barely form words. It was the shelter director who placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Claire, listen," he said gently. "I heard what Mr. Bennett said yesterday about Shadow, how he used to track people, find them. I think he knows something's wrong." Claire blinked through her tears. Shadow was standing by the door, his tail still, chest rising and falling rapidly, his eyes fixed on her as if awaiting a command. "Let him try," the director urged softly. "Let him find her." Without a second thought, she grabbed his leash, clipped it on, and whispered, Help me find her." He didn't hesitate. They ran. Weaving through back alleys and along winding streets, Shadow moved with a focused resolve. His nose shifted between the air and the ground, every turn calculated, propelled by an unspoken connection that led him toward Emma. He was so intent that his pace never faltered. People moved out of his way, observing the German shepherd surging forward with an unstoppable energy. 3 blocks from the shelter, behind an old bookstore, he came to a halt. He sniffed the air, let out a single sharp, urgent bark, and began clawing at a small gate. Claire's heart plummeted. She forced it open. There, huddled behind a broken overhang on the cold concrete, was Emma. Her knees were scraped, her lip was split, and her eyes were wide with fear, but she was breathing. "Emma!" Claire cried out, rushing to her side. Shadow didn't bark or whine. He walked over to Emma, sat down beside her, and gently rested his head on her shoulder. Emma dissolved into tears, not of pain, but of relief. Claire knelt beside them, embracing them both. She didn't ask what had transpired. She didn't need to. All that mattered was that Shadow had found her, and he hadn't given up until he did. The news spread rapidly, first in hushed tones at the shelter, then through local headlines. "Rescue dog finds missing girl." The German shepherd that wouldn't stop searching. Reporters began to call. Neighbors brought flowers and thank you cards. Children pressed their faces against the shelter windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of the hero dog. But Shadow was indifferent to the attention. His world revolved around Emma. Every morning, he would wait by the gate, his ears pricked at the slightest hint of her voice. Every afternoon, as she walked in with her bouncing backpack and hair in a messy ponytail, his gaze would soften. He trailed her everywhere, never intrusive, never demanding, just a constant, loyal presence. Claire observed all of this with a sense of quiet wonder. There was a sacred quality to the way they interacted, a rhythm that only they could hear. Emma didn't try to teach Shadow tricks or demand his obedience. She simply allowed him to be himself, and in return, he gave her his complete devotion. A week after the rescue, the shelter staff convened a meeting. Dozens of adoption applications were pouring in from families in other towns, retired police officers, and dog enthusiasts from all over. But Claire stood before the group, a letter in her hand and her voice thick with emotion. "I think we all know where Shadow belongs now," she said softly. She turned to Emma, who was seated next to her, clutching the well-worn plush toy. "If you'll have him," Claire said, kneeling down, "Shadow is yours." Emma's eyes grew wide. She glanced at her mom for affirmation. Claire nodded, already weeping. And in that instant, it was settled. Shadow was no longer a shelter dog. He was home. Life settled into a peaceful cadence after that. Shadow was more than just a pet. He was a member of the family. He slept curled at the base of Emma's bed each night, only stirring when she did. He would wait at the school gate every afternoon, tail still, eyes scanning for her. In the backyard, Emma would read aloud while Shadow lay beside her, his head on his paws. Sometimes she confided her secrets to him. Other times, she simply needed his nearness. When she cried, he didn't lick her tears away. He would just lean in, still and silent, letting her know she was not alone. Years went by, and Emma grew taller. Her own presence became quieter, yet more profound. She wasn't the most talkative student in class or one who sought the spotlight. But when someone was hurting or in need of quiet empathy, they sought out Emma. Her teachers remarked on her ability to listen, to notice the small things others overlooked. And her friends came to her when they needed someone who wouldn't pass judgment, someone who would simply be there, just as Shadow always had. On the day of her high school graduation, Emma wore a light blue dress and clutched a treasured photo of herself and Shadow from the day they officially became a family, a testament to their unbreakable bond. He was too old to climb the stage, but he sat in the front row, his tail wagging gently as she received her diploma. Applause filled the air, but it was the way Emma looked down at him, her eyes glistening with emotion, that conveyed everything. He had guided her through the most difficult parts of her childhood, stood with her when no one else seemed to understand, and remained by her side until she was strong enough to step forward on her own. Shadow passed on peacefully, stretched out on his favorite rug, as the sunlight warmed his old fur. Emma, now an adult, sat with him, whispering, "You saved me. I'll never forget." He let out one final sigh, and then was still. But his story did not conclude there. Emma carried his legacy onward. She went on to study animal behavior, dedicating her life to working with rescue dogs and becoming a gentle guide for the most fearful among them. She didn't try to fix them, she sought to understand them. Sometimes, while sitting beside a trembling dog, she would hum softly, just as she had once done with Shadow. And gradually, those dogs would inch closer, learning to trust once more. Years later, a new dog would enter her life, but none could ever fill his place. Because love, like a lasting impression, does not vanish. It remains in memories, in actions, and in the quiet space where healing can finally start. It lives on,